to be an effective leader, you need to have the other person's servant leadership in mind. And so you lead to their understanding, not from yours. And so one of the early questions practically that I ask everybody that I'm managing is saying, who's the most effective or how are you most effectively managed? And really, it helps me understand who they are. And then ultimately, in that, what environment have you thrived the most? And then it's my job to adjust my leadership style there. And so I think, few that people have servant led mindset with leadership. And then second, will adjust in effort to be the best leader that's going to get the most out of that individual they're leading, whether it's in a family, work, or personal environment.
Welcome to the How Leaders Think podcast, a show that transforms you by renewing your mind and giving you new ways to think. I am your host, Kenny Lang, and with me today is the Reed Nyffeler. Reed is a lifelong entrepreneur with a passion for developing the next generation of leaders who desperately need it, finding solutions and implementing growth strategy. He is the CEO and founder of Signal, a fast-growing, industry-leading security services franchisor with a mission to provide peace of mind to pursue passion in life. Reed also founded FilterGo, a national HVAC filter replacement service. I might need to hit you up after this. Designed to simplify air care for businesses, and Frame Brand, a franchise development company that helps franchise brands scale more effectively. This means he's smart, people. Pay attention. He is the author of Lead Exponentially and Transform Through Purpose, Your Path to Living an Authentic and Intentional Life. Grounded in faith, Reed has learned to identify his priorities and live with purpose in every area of his life. He carefully balances his professional aspirations with time spent enjoying and connecting with his happy, thriving family of 6. Welcome to the show, Reed.
Thank you, Kenny. Thanks for putting me on there, man. You make me sound like I know what I'm talking about. So thank you for at least, sharing that information.
It's at least as hard as actually knowing what you're talking about. So I try to sound like I know what I'm talking about as well. It's a practice that's served me well thus far, but I fear the powers are waning. Tell me today, Reed, what is on your mind?
I think you kind of alluded to it. There's the next generation of leaders and
Mm,
really leading others. I think as I kind of survey the United States, I see that there's so few leaders that are worth following. And then this next generation, as they're stepping into leadership roles, they're ill-equipped to help developing the next generation. And so, really leading others, I think, is critical not only for any or my organization and organizations, but anywhere in the world, right? And
mhm.
specifically the United States and those who are here to lead. So that's on my mind, just setting up and preparing the next generation of leaders to take a greater role as they continue to develop in their careers.
That's awesome, and it definitely resonates with me. You know, I'm inclined to say that there's something different about developing the next generation of leadership because I think that's probably been something talked about or around for, the beginnings of time. Is you always got to look at what's your leadership pipeline, who's coming up next, who's going to replace you, train, mentorship, apprenticeship, all those things. But we're living in an age where there's more generations active in the workplace. And it's not as cut and dry as one generation out, next generation up, next one being trained. It's meshed and merged a lot more. As you said, you're surveying, the American landscape of leadership. What do you see as the current thinking and prevailing wisdom that makes it necessary for you to have a focus on doing this right or doing it well?
Yeah, I think in order to develop the next generation of leader, you need to understand the mindset of that generation. Of course, I'm going to generalize, but you see the people that came out of, kind of really the era of no money, right, whatsoever. And this is
Mhm.
preceding the baby boomers. And they were just really miserly, really saving every penny and knowing that the world could financially end for them at any time. And so their motivation was really economic,
Mm,
right? And they were just everything was an economic decision that drove that. And so then you have your baby boomer generation, and a lot of that was really about opportunity. They didn't wanna have
mhm,
the paltry life their parents led, and they saw things were expanding, so they were motivated by opportunity, and they didn't and so I think the first generation, as I said, on the economic side, they really never really cared about autonomy. They just wanted survival. Right, and then the baby
okay.
boomers, they wanted opportunity, and then they would have autonomy as they retired at 65. So, you began to see the pension era, the labor unions come together, and so they said, I'll work till I was 65, give or take, and then I'll take autonomy. I'll live where I want to live, do what I want to do at that point.
Mhm.
And then, there's my generation, right? And I'm a Gen Xer. And so we would say, I want opportunity, and then I'll take autonomy when I can afford it. So in my 20s and maybe early 30s, I'll work diligently for wherever the opportunity may go. I'll transfer anywhere, I'll work at any company doing any job. And then in my 30s, I want to own a home, have a family, and be able to afford vacations with them, et cetera. And then you
Mhm.
see this next generation, they're saying, I value autonomy over anything, right? And so, but I need an opportunity to afford that. So I want to live where I want to live. I want to do what I want to do. I want to where that schedule is. And so, if you're developing the next generation of leaders, you have to orient your leadership style to that mindset, right? So, as I have a
Yeah.
cross section of leaders here, I have to adjust appropriately. But then the next generation leaders has to do the same.
Mhm. Absolutely. Do do you think what, trips leaders up and really looking downstream at the next generation is they tend to lead the way they wanted to be led and ascribe the values, to them that they may have. So, people coming in of the millennial or even Gen Z who are, starting to, uh, really have a presence in the workforce, they want that autonomy. They want the whether it's a work-life balance or however they wanna talk about it earlier, but they're being incentivized with the previous generation's set of values.
Right.
Do you think that is that the biggest tripping point, or is there something else that makes this more difficult? Because, I mean, you're not the only person I've spoken with that sees these issues with intergenerational workforces,
Mhm.
and so I have to imagine we might be getting more wrong than we're getting right if this topic keeps surfacing.
Yeah, I think a lot of it to be an effective leader, you need to have the other person's servant leadership in mind. And so you lead to their understanding, not from yours. And so one of the early questions practically that I ask everybody that I'm managing is saying, who's the most effective or how are you most effectively managed? And really, it helps me understand who they are, and then ultimately in that, what environment have you thrived the most? And then it's my job to adjust my leadership style there. And so I think, few that people have servant-led mindset with leadership, and then second will adjust in effort to be the best leader that's going to get the most out of that individual they're leading, whether it's in a family, work, or personal environment.
Yeah. I love that snippet. So that's definitely a clip, of leading to their understanding instead of from yours. Uh, when people lead from their own understanding, what are some of the biggest ways it's unproductive? Like, what are the real world results from leading from that place?
Yeah, well, there's this old adage that communication is the responsibility of the sender, not the receiver. And so I
Mhm,
think the adage is that people are like, well, they don't listen to me, and they don't do what I'm telling them to do, and so it's our responsibility as the leader to make sure it's understood, right?
mhm,
And not just understood in a I heard it, but ultimately I'm doing it and align with that. And so, the first generation, back to that economically driven, is saying, does this financially get a quick return? Right? Can I afford this? The
mhm.
next generation is saying, okay, if I did this for a long period of time, right? I'm working for the pension. Would it, you know, give me the autonomy I'm looking for? The Gen Xers would say, okay, is this something I'm passionate about? Right? I have a series of opportunities. And the final generation is saying, why? Why would I want to do that? And so if we can communicate to that generation with their level of understanding, we're going to get there. So, if I'm meeting with the next generation, I would say, here's why it's valuable to you, right? Not to
Mhm.
me, because you're not going to come work for me as your leader unless you see the value for yourself in your development. And I think that's critical to understand when you're doing that. And obviously, how do we do that, right? I think that's the next step is we understand what they value. I mean, and again, if we just look at it multi-generationally or we look at it individually, because I think that's, certainly a key misstep historically. The preceding generations would not communicate their thoughts and feelings as openly as the current generation. And so when we hear their thoughts and feelings being communicated, we understand what's driving that, right? What is
Yeah.
driving your perception on that? And then how can I align or help communicate why in alignment with that as your leader to help you in the next decisions and step of your career?
Do you think some of the challenge there for a leader is if they, like you were saying, is that the preceding generations, like we've gotten a little bit more open and honest about our feelings and our thoughts, as opposed to just like shut up and take one for the team, yeah, in sort of the roughest way to say that. But do do you think some of this is if I, as a leader, don't know how to articulate my thoughts and feelings, like maybe I'm missing that self-awareness. Maybe I haven't even paused long enough because I was of the generation or I was taught or I was trained. Like I tell people, look, I technically speaking, I'm a millennial. But when I look at, like, values and
Mhm.
goals and drives and stuff, I align a lot with Gen X as well, and I know nobody fits neatly all in one box or another, but do you think some of this has to do with the fact that maybe the leader has never really learned the self-awareness to be able to name their thoughts, their feelings, their goals? They were just sort of on autopilot?
Yeah, I think some of it is actually the prioritization of objective over person. So if we go back, preceding generations, the objective was all that mattered, right? I mean, we can look, maybe more politically even at the narrative because I think it's easier to see.
Mhm.
But we're going to win the war, right? World War II. It's everyone come together. You see the messaging of Rosie Riveter, right? I mean,
Mhm.
the objective: drop whatever you're doing, and the objective is the most important, and that's the primary methodology and mentality, right? And then I think you see with Gen X, you see a little bit more individualization, right? Choose your major and choose your career. It's not just, one size fits all. And
Mhm.
next is choose your now this next generation is choose your identity, right?
Yeah.
And really what is your identity instead of what your interests are at the other stage. And so again, it goes back to that. Are we and so through that, the objective has become less important and the identities become more important. And so if we are leading with the objective as the principal message and we just say, we'll berate you and we'll lead in a hierarchical way that we accomplish the objective, you're not going to get the outcome, right? But if you're
Yeah.
too individualized and you have really no objective, that's the trap on the other side. Like, say, what are we all collectively working towards? I mean, sure, we have our identities and they're clearly defined and we've communicated those, but now what do we collectively come together? And I kind of articulated this way is, do we have a common goal or a common enemy? If your common goal is too big, right, then you don't have identities with there. If you have a common enemy, your individualization is too much, but you really don't have an objective. You're just saying, this is what my enemy per se is. And so
Yeah.
I'm fighting for that. But what are we trying to accomplish? Don't know.
So, and I see that a lot in the work that I do with companies and leadership teams. How do we start to balance that? Because I what I don't hear you saying is we got to go all in on one or all in on the other. You talk about the objectives. You have Peter Drucker's famous like management by objectives, like
Yeah.
that kicked off an entire wave of leadership thinking that is still present and prevalent today. Decades and decades later. But you have the new wave of like, let's think about culture and the identities, right? I don't I rarely think anyone is all right or all
Correct.
wrong. There's a tension to be managed, and you might slide on that tension based on situation or person or team or what have you. What are you seeing in terms of leaders effectively managing that tension so that they can be a leader worth following?
Yeah, so I'm gonna walk it backwards from the generations with the identity and, and generation Y. And so
Mhm,
why is this our common enemy? Towards what are we trying to achieve, right? Which is what that first
mhm,
generation we discussed, it's in workplaces. So why is this common our common enemy? And I think that's what we say to this, generation, this generation Y, is saying why? Why is the benefit to you and why is that common enemy? And then we look at that middle generation and say, okay, so what do we need to do? Right? What do we need to do? What's the objectives we need to accomplish in order to achieve the outcome, the collective outcome that benefits everyone?
mhm,
Right? Then ultimately it's generation, the baby boomer generation. How? Because that's what they said. We don't necessarily need to know what we're doing. We just need to know how we're doing it. Right? They were more practical or tangible. And so I think as we're a multi-generational leader, we need to understand all three. Why? Why are we doing this? Right? That's this
mhm,
current generation. I won't do anything unless I say why. And then we need to help them understand what needs to be done, right? The generation X, like I'm in, we understand what needs to be done and then we figure out how. Right. And so we communicate what, and that's your objectives.
Mhm.
And then the how, that's what that, baby boomer generation is. That's the practical application of that. How many people, how many resources, how much? And so as
Right,
we communicate to each 3 generations, why, what, and how are so important. And the 3 generations ago, you could just do the how, right? And then 2
right.
generations, you could just do the what. And now we need to understand why, what, and how, and that's how we collectively do that. And if we only stay on why, we never get anything done. Right? If we only stay on what, we have too much theory, right? I hear that too. The theory and the practical have to work together. Theoretically, what needs to be done? How is the practical, right? And so I think you really need all of those to work well together in a multi generational workforce, and then also as a next generation leader to drive that going forward.
It sounds like leadership is becoming increasingly more complex. And obviously people have, again, we've had probably 50, 60 years of people writing more specifically to just how do you lead, what do you lead, people, objectives, things like that. Um, this could all be very discouraging to up and coming leaders. And I think, some of the best leaders don't think of themselves as, well, I just want to be a leader. Like there's something that they want to achieve. There's something they see. Obviously, you're somebody who's, founded multiple companies. So you saw an opportunity, you saw a purpose, you saw a cause, an enemy, a goal, and went out and did it. But you probably weren't thinking, it's like, I'm going to lead this, revolution or something like
Mhm.
that. This what are you saying to your leaders that they want to lead, but it's maybe there's more nuance than there's ever been in leadership and maybe more weight that comes with it than ever before?
Yeah, first of all, some things are historically naturally challenging as a leader. The bigger the organization and the more success you have, the more complicated leadership becomes, right? So,
Mhm.
meaning with just one person and ourselves, we can, generally make our own decisions, but we're leading, in my case, 8,500 people. It's more dynamic and complex. And so I think that naturally happens at progression, right? You see
Mhm.
leadership evolve at scale. And so that's one thing. But I also think, why it's more complex, compounding that right now is communication, transfers of information, right? You went back as little as 100 years ago. It's pretty crazy to believe. There was a single source or a primary source of information. Maybe you'd have a newspaper that circulated, maybe the cell phone and telegraph are coming out, but that's one-to-one communication. Whereas now it's hyper dynamic, right? Information goes way faster, unedited, right? I mean, the newspaper at least is edited. And if you had, you're clicking in Morse code for telegrams, you're pretty clear about misspellings and spelling, right? And now we live in this generation within seconds, we can type a prompt. We don't even have to type the whole sentence. And then AI is taking that message and proliferating that all across the world in
Yeah.
seconds. And so now we are not getting it fed in a single source in a single way, but it's this mass proliferation. And so you've got leaders that are complex and too many voices, right? Voices that you have to discern at the point, who do I listen to and who do I trust? And leaders have done themselves a disservice by being untrustworthy, right? And at the same time,
Mhm.
there's so much more information that we need to know which one do we trust over someone or what other items. And so that's what makes leadership so dynamic and complex is that at scale, large success drives that. Now, I think now we'll go to simplicity very quickly because I think it's relevant. When you don't have scale, and I think this is a point worth communicating, in third world countries, in first world countries, you have many problems. Right, in
Mhm.
third world countries, they have one, right? Predominantly, hunger and water, right? I mean, that's their primary problem they're trying to solve every day. In our case, we're past all of that. We're in the United States,
Mhm.
so, the pervasive hunger and readily available water to us is resolved. And so now we have more problems, which are more dynamic, and so that's why growth and scale create greater leadership problems, than a third world country would have.
Right. Yeah. I teach a lot of clients that, you're growing, it's all good. I was like, but and you're adding headcount and revenue and all these things, and it's exciting. I said, but what's growing at the same rate? It's your complexity,
Mhm,
right? So it it sounds like it's harder than ever to discern the signal from the noise.
mhm,
W- what has helped you make peace with that? Because obviously you've been through iterations, you're seeing all these generations coming through. different styles, books, conferences, and you've seen those things. What is helping you discern those things? Because I can't imagine the sheer volume of things that fly your way.
Sure, and I think there's really 2 things that distract any leader, right? And I've kind of boiled it down to this simplest terminology, which is fear and focus. So
Mm,
first, any leader could be afraid, fear, right? I always say we're governed by our greatest fear. So if we're afraid of the economic disaster that is forthcoming or lack of leadership or labor challenges, right? That's going to distract us and we'll be, managing according to that fear. And the second is focus, right? We get distracted not because we're afraid, because we chase the most recent squirrel or whatever news narrative is otherwise there. And so you need to be able to focus, right, and on the right things, because we don't
mhm,
want to focus on the wrong things. And so that's what came out of my book, The Transform Through Purpose. And so
mhm,
the first was a very clear set of value systems, right? And for me, it's faith, family, first priority faith, second priority family, third priority productivity, and fourth is fun. And so I do that in order because that reminds me every time, every day, every circumstance where my priorities are. And I schedule my time. The second and only resource we have is time, right? And the manageable resource we have within time is our energy. And
mhm,
so I wanna make sure that I apply my energy in that order, and so I do a daily, in fact, weekly for sure, value of my calendar. I mean, I sit down with my executive assistant and I say, "Okay, what is going to be the objective I need to accomplish, and then what is distracting me? Where is, my lack of focus? And then what are things I'm thinking about, just kind of where you started the podcast, that will inhibit me, fear, right? That'll drive that going forward. And then how do I maintain my values all the way through? And I think then it's just allocating your calendar and your time accordingly. And that's that first book. And then once you master that, it goes to the second book, which is Lead Exponentially. And so once I've mastered that, now it's teaching others how to do that and apply that. And that's the only way you get any collective scale, right? I mean, I can only produce so much as an individual on a daily basis. But by
sure.
leading exponentially, which is essentially leading through others, training them
Mhm,
these tools, and then, managing them in scope of their strengths and weaknesses in order to achieve that is the next one. And then I actually have a third book coming out this summer, which is brand new, and that's leading organizations, right? And so that's hitting the next level. So it's first lead self, second lead others, which is lead
mhm.
exponentially, and third lead organizations, right? Where are you taking this collective group of leaders organizationally to lead? And so that's how they kind of all work together, and that's how I kind of maintain my focus is clarity around who I am and what I'm trying to achieve.
And is that the order in which you have found to be successful in working through? Because some people will make, the self, others, and organization, is a common theme amongst a lot of leaders. It's
Mhm.
for a reason. I think they're good buckets. I use those. Um, but do you find that there is a sequence of those things that from sort of like the inside out? And is that why you wrote the books that way?
Absolutely, 100%. I think a lot of people make the mistake of, "I'll lead organization when I get the title," right? I'm gonna be a CEO or whatever the title is. Okay, so now I'm leading an organization. Oh, man, now I gotta lead these other people, right? And they just don't listen, they don't follow, they don't do what I'm asking them to do, they aren't able to
Mhm.
follow what I'm doing. And I'm like, "It's not me, it's not my problem. I can't be me as it can't be my decisions I'm making, it's gotta be them," right? So they
Right.
never get to leading self well. Right?
Mhm,
Conversely, if I go interview people or go identify a leader and I see a tremendous lack of self-discipline, I know they're
mhm.
gonna be a poor leader, or conversely, if I see that they have phenomenal self-discipline, I can teach them leadership. Why? Because they understand the power and value of consistency. And organizations that create the greatest value have consistency, right? I mean, we can go look at global organizations that have been around for a long, long time, and they've been consistently in that space delivering great service, right? You think
Mhm.
Chick-fil-A, Disney, many of these places, they aren't made overnight. They're consistent.
Sure.
Well, guess what? You go dive that all the way down. Truett Cathy, who was the original founder of Chick-fil-A, was super consistent in his life and lived
Mhm,
his values. And so it starts with leading self well, has to be that one. And then what happened next is he was leading others well and doing that consistently. And they embodied the values because they saw the value over time of his consistent leadership. And then finally, he was leading an organization. Because if you hear and know his story, he started multiple restaurants that were not necessarily successful until Chick fil A. And it was his development of himself over time, then others, then organizations. So
mm.
it has to be that order, it has to. And if anybody is leading by title first, than trying to figure out why they're got to blame others and never focus on leading self, they're never going to be successful at long term in a leadership role.
I completely agree. I'm curious, in your opinion, which is the hardest transition to make from leading self to leading others, or from leading others to leading the organization, and then why?
Yeah, great question. I would say, having watched it, I would say leading self to leading others, because ultimately the reality is it's not about you, and that's the hardest part for people to transfer, right? They still, when you're leading self, you have aspirational goals for your career,
Mhm.
when and you need to suppress self to say, I have aspirational goals to lead others well, that they are successful, and I may not get the credit, right? I may not
Mhm.
communicate, what is happening, and so it's leading others. Then if you can do that very well, you're ready to lead an organization. And I
Mhm.
think the challenge many times is many people are ascending to a leadership role, not because they're ready, because the organization needs someone in that role.
Mhm.
Right? I mean, I think there's an open seat, so we go step into that seat, but they're not at all ready, right? And so that's where they think they're leading others and are ready to lead an organization, but they never really led self well. But the role is vacated because the organization's growing, and I think that's the inherent challenge. Just because there's an open position at the leadership role doesn't mean the person is accepting that is ready.
That'll preach. Um, and I think there's a lot of people who should rewind and just listen to that on a loop for
Yeah,
a little while
exactly.
until
Yeah,
it sinks in. Um, Something you were saying, struck me. I don't know where to cite the source. I have bad source amnesia, but,
sure.
um, I do think there, or I guess I'd be curious of your take on the narrative that, yes, lead self, then lead others, a team, and then lead the organization. Is that the goal is always ascension from, leading more and more people underneath you. Um, but we have cliches like the top salesperson being promoted to sales
Mhm,
manager, and
mhm.
then suddenly they're a total bust. And it's because they're wildly different skill sets,
Right.
right? They just think it's like, oh, that would be the next step in your career, is to go do that. But if you don't have the skill set for leading others, but you're a phenomenal salesperson, and that could apply in any position, or any technical role. W How do you think through, some people do have the skill set in an org chart to lead others, and others have the skill set to just be the most phenomenal team member and executor of that. I know that there are some companies now that they're starting to structure career paths, or their org chart, or whatever they want to, talk to it about, is that if you do want to be on a path of leading others, it looks like this. But if you really like what you do, but you also want a career path to keep going up, to make more money, have more opportunities, things like that, then there's sort of this parallel track, as opposed to it's only by getting to the very top, that you are bettering yourself and your career.
Yeah, and so, when I have those conversations with individuals, I said, "Hey, obviously you've progressed and are doing a great job. There's really 2 paths here, which is I think you're a candidate for management. And is that product or project management or people management?" And I think you have to bifurcate the 2, because you can move forward in product or project management and not lead people, right? Or you can be a great people manager, and I say I make them make a decision. I said, "Which one do you prefer?" If you had to choose one and then two, why? Because what they communicate in that mind is gonna be their most natural desire to
Mhm.
manage,
Yeah.
right? And I would say either path, if the outcome was the same, right, financially and, leadership-wise, the outcome be the same. And so I think, there was a earlier in the conversation, we are talking about the progression going forward, and I think, why do you go get a salesperson to move into a sales role as a sales manager? And I think what leads to success when you're managing, when you're at that, productive role where you're an employee before you lead others, is you are a business development or a department development strength. But in
Mhm.
order to be a leader, you need to be a people developer. And then to manage organizations well, you need to be a culture developer. And so each of those
Right.
3 things are separate, right? Because I can be a great project developer, right? So, um, I'll use it in a parenting analogy because I think it helps people understand that, right? And
Mhm.
so I can be, and I'm a terrible cook, so I'm just gonna we're gonna dream for a second here, but I can be the best cook and I can make eggs, about it, and maybe scrambled and fried. And so I can be
Some
the best.
toast.
We'll just stick with scrambled egg because that's about all I know here. But I can make scrambled eggs, right? And I'm a great cook. But that doesn't necessarily mean that I'm gonna be teaching others how to do that, right? And then, and all of us can maybe remember this as next, I could teach someone, right? I have a 14-year-old son, and I could teach him how to make scrambled eggs. Now I'm a people developer. Now it's not me making great eggs or stepping in or investing my time to make the eggs. It's saying, hey, here's how you crack it. Make sure you don't get any shell in there, right?
Mhm.
And here's the temperature you set it on, and walk through, and then you make it 2, 3, 4, 5 times, right? Instead of me making eggs, right? That's not scalable. I'm teaching him how to make eggs.
Mhm.
And then the next is you can have the great eggs. And I remember, going to a place and this individual, he was making eggs and he was an omelet maker, but he made it a fun experience, right? And everybody's like excited to get an omelet because the way this guy created culture, right? I mean, he had a job and he could have taught everybody how to make the eggs clearly, but he made it a big entertainment value and the culture was there. And so you could see just the buffet line getting excited about, standing in line, and we were willing to wait a couple of seconds or a minute or two
Yeah.
to talk to him because you made it fun. And that's the third level, the culture developer, right? And you could see that's where he was at. He probably made great eggs at home.
Mhm.
And then he was the supervisor and taught other people on the days off to make eggs. But now he was the guy creating the culture around the buffet there. And so that's that third step. And however, the person that had no personality was a great egg person, probably wouldn't be a great manager, right? He couldn't develop other people to do that. And he was in that appropriate role. But this guy, he was
Mhm.
a culture developer around egg making. And so I think those are the three steps. And,
Yeah.
he could have been the best omelet maker, but not train the other. Then he could train others to make great omelets and then ultimately create a culture as the third step. And that's the organizational development.
I love that example, and, I think you and I might be at the same level, chef skills wise.
Mhm.
But, so thankfully, my wife is a tremendous cook, and, we don't go hungry.
Well, I always say,
But
every chef needs a consumer, and so, they were nothing without me because someone's gotta eat that, you know what I mean? They're unemployed without me. So I
exact
basically keep a ton of people in business because I'm a consumer of food.
my wife's in the other room. I wanna go run that line past her after this
Exactly.
podcast, and I'll report back.
Okay.
Um, so, in hearing that, I'm curious of your take because I hear this. I think I even heard it last week from a client in a session. Do you separate then management from leadership and what they mean? Because I hear some people use it interchangeably, and I hear some people stack one above the other, or in your case, maybe it has wildly different focuses where management is more about product and leadership's more about people. What's your take on that?
Yeah, I mean, I would say there's management is more administrative, right?
Mm.
And, leadership is more developmental, so I'd kinda bifurcate the 2. And some days you need administrative things to be done, right? He
Hmm.
we have to yeah, I would say we'll juxtapose it this way. Management is is this a tension to manage, right? That's and or a problem to solve. If it's a problem to solve, that's a leadership discussion,
Hmm.
right? If it's a tension to manage, that is a management side. And so one thing I've learned, this is probably 15 years ago, I can bounce between the 2 naturally, but I need to communicate that to the person I'm talking to. "Hey, we need to manage this," or "We should lead." We wanna use terminology, say, "Hey, this is gonna be a management discussion, right? Here's some administrative tasks
Right.
we need to manage." And so I've learned if you kinda start with kind of your intent, it really helps the other person that's there and say,
Yeah.
"Hey, I'm not here to micromanage, but these things need to be managed." Whereas if they
Right.
see that and I'm doing a and they're typically seeing me lead them, and then it feels like micromanagement because I have some administrative tasks that need to be done, right? And some people can interpret that obviously, and some cannot, and they take it personally. And I'm saying, hey, I don't care to micromanage, but there's some administrative tasks we need to walk through. And I
Right.
even go this far, and I would say it's not even because I trust you, because sometimes people can misinterpret or don't trust you. It's because I can't sleep until I know these tasks are there. So please help me do
Right.
that because I'm going to ruminate on these things. And so it may seem a little bit like micromanagement because I just have to have that level of comfort. But as a leader, as an entrepreneur, I can't it just stays on my mind until I get that closure. So
Right.
please help me to understand administratively these things have happened and then you get that working dynamic. Conversely, leadership, I'll be in their meetings. I'm saying, hey, I'm going to be highly involved in this early project because I want to lead it well. and I need to develop the intuition by being at the front lines, right? I need
Mhm.
to crack the eggs with you per se. I can't
Mhm.
watch it from afar so that I can see the challenges as I'm learning to make an omelet. And so when I communicate that and understand between the two, I can say this is going to be a management process that will lead to intuition for leadership. This is a leadership process that I understand from a management standpoint so I can get it off my mind and move on. And so I think clarifying that for the people you're working with is super critical.
I love the framing of setting the context up front because then, you don't have that sort of distraction going back to focus and those sorts of things. Like your people can lose focus if they're like, well, what does he really want? What is it? What are we really talking about? Like he's saying these words, but I don't know what they mean.
And that's
So
the important part of going back to the earlier part of our conversation, which is I need to communicate to their understanding, not mine. And so that's an example of going back to that as
yeah,
well.
that's really good. So so it sounds like you would actually put leadership and management on parallel tracks. They each need the other.
Yeah, I would say they each need the other, yes, but ultimately the more rare likely thing is the leadership. And so if I should lean either direction, it should be leadership over time, right? Especially at scale. And I think that's the evolution, right? If you're leading a larger organization, it's going to be more leadership. If you're leading a smaller organization, be more management, right? I mean,
Yeah.
it's really about managing the task because we have not assigned or developed or given off that management role to somebody else. So that's ours by default. And so if people are leading a small organization, they may not have a ton of people to lead necessarily. But if you have a lot of people, don't lean towards management tasks. I mean, everyone needs your leadership ability and direction because that provides comfort so they can perform their management task.
Yeah. I think in my experience, I've seen people struggle with that because that feels more ethereal. Whereas management, administrative things, product led things, there's a shorter feedback loop
Hmm.
on like I do a thing, I see the result, I log it, was it to spec or not, whatever that may be. Whereas through people in development, I mean, people are squirrely. Um, and, if more information was the answer, I heard someone say, "If more information was always the answer, we'd all be billionaires with six-pack abs," right?
Yeah.
But there's room for interpretation and understanding or misunderstandings, and people develop at different speeds. And so I think that creates a lot of discomfort and guessing, and probably where the micromanagement comes in is like I want to control this, but hopefully at some point as a leader you learn you cannot control people. You can guide them, you can lead them. It's sort of like a moving car that you could help steer a bit, but the car is moving.
Yeah, and I think we as leaders or as individuals, we kind of lean towards one camp of theoretical or
Mhm.
practical. I think if you're sitting in school, the people that accelerate in school many times are the theoretical, right? I mean, they're just
Mhm.
studying things, not necessarily practically doing that. In the field, it's more practical. Said another way, the white collar is more theoretical, the blue collar is more practical. We see these juxtapositions often, but the best leaders are the ones that can translate theory into practicality, understand the practical application, and then inform the theory. And I'll
Mhm.
give a very specific individual that comes to mind is Warren Buffett, right?
Mhm.
Because theoretically, he does a phenomenal job of understanding every element. And if you don't know who Warren Buffett is, he's the Oracle of Omaha from Omaha. And he basically is one of the greatest financial minds that has ever walked this earth. I mean, his record would speak to that. And he's now in his 90s. But he theoretically understands how a business and why a business would be successful, right? He studies all their up and down, every
Mhm.
financial metric. But what I believe leads him to be super successful is his ability to practically communicate that to the average investor.
Yeah.
Right, if he's speaking all these financial terms, myself and everyone else, largely 95% of the room wouldn't understand it. But we
Right.
understand him practically applying that, and that is what is made him so successful because people will follow his
Right.
investment theory and invest in him because they understand practically where it's at, and I think that's a leadership at scale approach. When you can take a message
100%.
and then theoretically understand it and simplify it, that's the way to go.
Yeah, well, and that I think is why you see like his shareholder letters and stuff
Mhm.
being studied. Like that's not everybody's letter. Everybody has to write letters. I mean, if you're publicly traded, like you have to have these reports and all these things. But there's only a handful of these sort of leaders, like Warren. Bezos's letters I hear referenced quite a lot. That it's the way in which they were able to communicate that from to like going back to what you're saying is to that person's level of understanding that needed to receive it. If there's a leader listening right now that is they're really this is clicking, something shifting, or maybe they've been thinking about this, but it feels good to have someone like you read, affirm like, okay, cool, I'm on the right track. If they want to be a leader, someone who is skilled at communicating to the level of understanding of the people around them, whether that's multi-generational or technical to people or whatever chasm they're trying to cross, what's a baby step they could take in the next 24 hours, spending little to no money to start to develop that skill?
Yeah, I would say get your same framework of questions always ready for everyone, and I have them 3 for you. You can take mine or you can develop your own, but the first one is, "Who are you?" I ask that question, "Who are you?" And that gives them the ability to describe themselves in a way that I'm intently listening and that is their highlight reel for themselves. The second is, why are we here? Why are we meeting? Why have you talked to me or why have you come to me? Why are you at this organization? What connects us? What
Mhm.
brings the two of us together? Right? And that clarifies what they're trying to get from me and the role that we have together and the balance we have to do. And then the third question is, where are you trying to go? Essentially, where would you like to go? Where's next?
Mm.
And so then I understand who they are. So that gives me the communication to their understanding. Why are
Mhm.
they here? What are they trying to do? Then how on the other side? So, all those are walking through the three that we've discussed. And if you have those three questions, you listen intently, it'll accelerate your ability to lead them well because
Yeah.
you have a good perspective of where that's at. If you're in that role, you ask those questions because most people make the mistake of telling you all those things themselves as a leader, and then you're letting them choose how to interact with you. But as a
Mhm.
leader, we go to where they're at, right? We might have a more dynamic ability to support them. And
Mhm.
if we understand those three questions, that's a practical step. So, again, to recap, who are you? Why are we here right now? And then where are you trying to go? Ask those three questions. It'll give you a
Yeah.
nice starting point to work with them as a leader.
I really like that. I love good questions and collecting those, and so I'm definitely adding those, and I've become more fascinated with the sequence of questions lately as I've been coaching clients. But those are excellent. So hope everybody pause, write those down. You probably due to the fact that we live in the age of AI and a lot of so many calls are recorded and things like that is I would say take those questions and say, how would these three questions, if I had actually asked these during this conversation with my direct report or someone else, what do you think I would have surfaced to start to connect the dots a little bit faster? And maybe gain some insights on how to navigate those in the future. Well, Reed, this has been a phenomenal conversation. I certainly feel like we could have a lot more to talk about, but this isn't the Joe Rogan podcast, and we're not going for 3 hours. Maybe in a different a different format. But if somebody want to know more about you, more about your books, more about Signal, where should they go to connect with those brands, those products, and then maybe connect with you if they have some follow up questions?
Yeah, thenextinleadership.com. Right. I've created that as a site to really help develop next in leadership. This podcast will be on there. The book resource will be on there. Obviously, there's a direct email. You can communicate with me and we can help continue the conversation. And it's thenextinleadership.com. And really, why am I doing this? I think is to really help develop the next generation leader. I feel a responsibility to share what I've learned with others so that they can likewise carry that forward just as I was invested in by others through their content to get to this point.
Fantastic, and we'll link that up along with the emails and Amazon links, all those things. We'll make sure those are all in the show notes, so it's easy for people to get a hold of you. But Reed, thank you again for spending a little bit of time with me today. And leaders, thank you for spending time with me and Reed. We understand you have many choices when it comes to podcasts, and we thank you for choosing us. I sincerely hope if you made it this far that you have two, three, four, maybe more nuggets of gold that you can really take with you and apply even later today or tomorrow, so that you can get to applying these things, right? Really translate that theoretical into the practical, as Reed was talking about. If you've gotten value out of this conversation or any of the other ones, I encourage you to like, rate, review, subscribe, whatever the button is on your platform of choice where you consume this. Doing that gets these sort of conversations and these resources in front of more people just like you who are trying to take their next step in leadership. That's a free and easy way for you to pay it forward. And won't that make you feel warm and fuzzy inside? But until next time, change the way you think, you'll change the way you lead. We'll see you.